Howdy folks, this is Big Sam, and today we're going to be conducting a complete overview of the stock variations of the 9130 Mosin Nagant rifle. We'll be going from left to right. The earliest stock will be on the left, the latest stock will be on the right. Now, our story begins here in the year 1893 when Imperial Russia started producing the first dragoon rifle. And this is important because the dragoon rifle is the rifle that the 9130 is based off of. The primary differences between the dragoon rifle and the 9130 rifle are the front and the rear sights. So let's take a look at that. Here on the left, we have a dragoon rifle, and on the right, we have a 9130 rifle. Now we can see on the left, our dragoon sight is a little bit different than a 9130 sight. Now, if we take a look at the stocks here, the big thing we're going to be looking at through this entire video overview are going to be these metal pieces, which I will be referring to as escutcheons. These are what help guide the sling through the stock. And we can see here that the 9130 rifle and the dragoon rifle appear to be the same. And that's because from 1893, when the first dragoon rifle was made, all the way up until World War II, the stock would see very little changes. And it's very hard to distinguish them. So we can see here, if we see metal escutcheons with these screws in them, this is a great way to distinguish an early stock from later ones. Look for these little screws right here. If we take a look at the front escutcheons, we see the screws are present here as well. Again, this is a fairly common pattern of stock just because it was produced for so long. Now, we come to the year 1941. In 1941, Nazi Germany invades Soviet Russia. And Soviet Russia would see some of the most devastating losses seen by any army in the history of the world. In the second half of the year 1941, the Soviet army lost approximately 5.5 million rifles. Now that's such a large number, it's extremely difficult to even comprehend that in your mind. I mean, how do you even quantify 5.5 million rifles? I don't think I could fit that many in my local Walmart store or Costco. That's a ridiculous amount of rifles. And losing this many rifles brings up an interesting question. How do we replace them? Because the Soviet army needed to replenish those in both manpower and rifles, right? They lost both. So getting men was pretty easy. There's a lot of people in Soviet Russia in 1941 and 1942. But how do we make more rifles? Well, they had to make a bunch of rifles more quickly. So one of the things they had to do was to start to cut corners. And they did this a few ways. One of the ways was in the way they machined the receivers. They would actually have less quality control on the actual machining. Now, it's important to note here that functionally, the rifles were still adequate, more than adequate. They were excellent rifles, but the fit and finish was not always the best. Given the amount of resources they had to fill and replenish, that was one luxury they just couldn't afford. So that's very common to see in rifles made after 1941. But what we're more interested in today is looking at the stock. So here we can see that there is absolutely no escutcheon here in the stock. It's just cut out wood. Okay, so this was one of the changes made by the Izhevsk arsenal. In the rear, there would be no escutcheon at all. Let's take a look at the front escutcheon. Here in the front, we can see just a simple sheet metal insert that's essentially put and then bended in place. It's very simple, and it's a lot more cost effective and does the same job as this expensive piece of metal with screws does, right? You remove a lot of metal here, you remove machining and man hours in order to make something like this. So moving to something like this was a no-brainer in 1942. And that's when this was done at the Izhevsk arsenal. Now we're going to pause for a minute and go back a bit, because there was another arsenal making 9130 rifles, which was the Tula arsenal. Now the Tula arsenal actually stopped making rifles, 9130 rifles specifically, in the year 1940, before the Nazis invaded. Why was that? Well, we can speculate, but in 1940, war was already on the horizon, right? Poland had already been invaded. The Soviets already had to face the Finnish army during the Winter War, starting in November of 1939. And observing all of these, I think the Soviets learned a lot of lessons that they wanted to modernize their army as much as possible. And one of the ways they wanted to do this was to stop producing the 9130 rifle and instead start producing the SVT-40 Tokarev rifle, which was a semi-automatic rifle in the same caliber as these, 7.62 by 54R. So in 1940, the Tula arsenal stopped producing the 9130 rifle altogether in favor of focusing on the SVT-40 rifle. Izhevsk, however, continued to make the 9130 rifle. Now, in 1941, when Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, Tula was still not making the 9130 rifle. Now, if you look on a map, this was actually problematic for the Soviet Union because Tula is very close to Moscow, relatively speaking, compared to the size of Russia. And that became a problem because the Nazi Germany actually got pretty close to Moscow in 1941. So the Soviets were afraid that the Germans were just going to completely take over all of their machining and capabilities of making advanced weaponry at the time. So they took the entire factory at Tula and moved it to a remote city known as Mednogorsk, which is just north of the modern-day Kazakhstan border. Now this was very convenient for the Soviets because it was so far away that they did not have to worry about the Nazis capturing their equipment there. Mednogorsk is actually famous for not being near anything else in the entire world. That's how remote it is. Okay, so we go back to 1942. Now we have a little bit more context of the two factories. In 1942, Tula would actually come back. So they were able to repel the Nazis from Moscow. Tula was no longer under direct threat, and they obviously wanted to make more rifles. That would have been great. So they started producing rifles again at the Tula arsenal. Now, one of the issues they faced was, well, the arsenal was still there. They just shipped out all of their machinery thousands of miles away. So they had to track that down. So they had some logistical problems, but they were able to start producing rifles again. And here's what's interesting. In 1942, when Tula resumed making the 9130 rifle, they actually did not produce this stock type. They spun up the old stock type again, the quote-unquote pre-war style with the escutcheons. That's why I don't always like to refer to this stock as a pre-war stock, because this stock was actually produced by the Tula arsenal during the war, even though almost all of these stocks will be from before the war. So there's always an exception to every rule, and that is the exception with this stock pattern here. Okay, so Tula is back and they're producing this style of stock. Now, if we move on up a little bit in 1942, we go back to the Izhevsk arsenal here. And they started getting yelled at by the main artillery directorate of the Soviet Union. And that's not someone you want to be mad with you, not someone you want to upset. And they were upset by the fit and finish of the 9130 rifles coming out of the Izhevsk plant. They worked perfectly fine. They were good, solid, reliable rifles, but they had the curb appeal of a decrepit house. It was not good. So Izhevsk listened to them after a bunch of arguing, and they said, okay, we will improve the quality of these rifles. So what they did was, on the sniper rifles produced by Izhevsk, it's hard to see here, but they would actually start putting the metal escutcheon in the rear as well. That's it. And just on the sniper rifles, later in 1942, early 1942 Izhevsk sniper rifles will not have this sleeve here at the back, this escutcheon. The standard 9130 rifle would remain unchanged from a stock standpoint. So, in their eyes, they did a lot. In our eyes, they did very little. It's almost comical. But an interesting little tidbit there. Now, we're still in the year 1942, but we now move to Karelia at the Finnish continuation war. And Finland, instead of Soviet Russia, would find themselves in a pretty interesting predicament. They were starting to capture large volumes of these 9130 rifles. And they found themselves having to start producing domestically their own stocks for these rifles. So here we see an interesting pattern where we have a different type of escutcheon. And these will also have screws in them. And they'll also have a little hole here, and through that hole will be this very long bolt. And it will bolt through this sling swivel right here. And we'll see the same thing at the front as well. Right here. This particular stock pattern is actually known as the potbelly stock. It's very distinguishable from right here. And we see this is cool because it's actually a two-piece stock. These are the front and the rear pieces are two separate pieces of wood spliced and glued together. And it's nice because that actually provides the stock with extra strength. If you've ever held a rifle in a Finnish potbelly stock, one of the first things you will notice is the weight of it. It's a very heavy-duty, very strong stock. And these would be made of Arctic birch. Very nice stock. Okay, so we move from 1942 back to the Soviet-Russian front in 1943. In 1943, the Tula arsenal actually developed a new type of escutcheon. And it would be this one piece of metal here that would actually insert into the stock. And there would be these little tabs right inside here. And they would actually fold in and sort of brace themselves against the wood, holding it in place. Now, again, there's an exception to every rule. This pattern of stock is commonly referred to as a post-war stock. However, this pattern was actually produced starting in 1943 during the middle of World War II. So again, there's an exception to every rule, but a nice little tidbit there to be aware of. Izhevsk would actually follow, and we'd see these being produced by Izhevsk starting around 1944. Okay. So now, by the end of the war, both factories were producing stocks with this pattern of escutcheon. We see it at the front as well. All right. This would also be present on both the 9130 rifle as well as the sniper rifles. And the last rifle we're going to be taking a look at here today is a laminated stock. Now, as far as we know, a few of these were probably produced right at the end of the war, but most of these almost certainly never saw combat action during World War II. One of the easy ways to distinguish a laminated stock from a other generic post-war stock, well, we can't distinguish it by the escutcheons because a laminated stock has the same big metal escutcheons with no screws present that the standard pre-war stock has. However, if we look a little closely here, we tend to see this dark kind of a cherry red finish. It's a very desirable finish. When we see it's laminated, we can see there's actually pieces of plywood here all glued together. A very beautiful stock. Another thing you'll commonly see with these, the laminated stocks, there's this bolt here in the wrist of the stock, and that's here to help reinforce the wrist from additional cracking. So if you see that, there's a very good chance it could be a laminated stock as well, assuming it has these. Every laminated stock should have these post-war type escutcheons. Okay guys, thanks for watching. That was a complete overview of the stock variations of the Mosin Nagant 9130 rifle. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you'd like to see next, and let me know if y'all have any prayer requests. Hope y'all have a great day, and I'll see y'all on the next video.